Welcome, FC Dallas Curious fan, to Third Degree, the podcast. This is episode 63. We're going to talk about our continuation of our FC Dallas history. This is the 2015 to 2020 session. It's part 5, although part 4 with Kevin was broken into 2 pieces because Kevin being Kevin, it got a little long. Today's special guest is special and not special at the same time. He's special because he's a soccer knowledgeable fellow that is been around FCD for a fair amount of time, specifically the section we're going to talk about today. He's not special, however, because it's our usual contributor, Dan Crooke. Dan, welcome back to the podcast. It's been a couple of weeks since we had you on.
We're back. Wow.
We're back.
Hi, Buzz. I'm calling in from Orlando, where I've just been banned from Disney World after asking too many questions about the Orlando plan.
The Orlando plan. Yeah, listen, the Orlando plan is special because it's funny. Even yesterday, when I paraphrased Luchi and used the word when instead of if, Luchi actually contacted me. He's like, you got to change that because they are really, really sensitive in Major League Soccer about this plan being official or not until the players sign off of it. It's really odd how worried they seem to be and how uptight they seem to be about this whole thing. All right, let's not dwell on the Orlando thing because that's not what this podcast is about. This podcast is about FC Dallas history. And if you were with us last time, Dan, I know you listened to the podcast with Kevin. I listened to it again, as I always do. In 2014, Pareja was cycling through all of his options, trying to figure out who he could count on. The stats that back that up, if you heard that podcast, the stat was there was 23 players who played in 10 or more games, but only 2 of them got to 30 games, and that was Javon Watson and Matt Hedges, which shows you that there were a whole bunch of players that played in the teens and in the low 20s that were, as he looked for combinations and guys that he could trust. So towards the end of this season, they start clicking, and FCD gets into the playoffs, and they beat Vancouver, but then falls to Seattle, which is the bogey team these days in the playoffs. All right, so at the end of this season, Dan, I'm sure you remember, we're starting to see signs of Mauro Diaz being a good piece. This is going into 2015. Fabian Castillo is peaking. Zach Lloyd and Hedges are relied on pretty heavily in the defense. Ryan Hollingshead finally comes into town and plays. But things are not in a full rebuild mode at that point, are they, when we're coming into 2015? It's more of just Pareja's looking to tweak his team again.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. There was definitely a changing of the guard at the back. Raul Fernandez had come in to replace Hartman. That coming out of 2014, he departs. George Johns obviously got his bone bruise in his knee. That means he never plays again. So there was that element of the defensive shuffle as well. And I think really in that aspect, you can point to Matt Hedges coming of age in those next couple of years. Then even going on the attacking side of the ball, that was the Michael Barrios introduction, which, although unspectacular at first, we definitely went on to appreciate his efforts.
Yeah, Michael Barrios, the 2 big signings, if you call them big, of the offseason going into 2015. As you mentioned, Michael Barrios comes in on the wing, who eventually, obviously, is a big-time, huge, massive player. And the second sort of interesting player is that they pick up Atiba Harris in the re-entry draft and convert him to right back. And as you mentioned, that's part of this slight defensive changes that are happening as Pareja still tried to figure things out. And another position that is chaotic in 2015 is goalkeeper, because Chris Seitz is around at this point already, and they pick up Dan Kennedy versus the dispersal draft from Chivas USA's contraction. Kennedy's probably expected to be the starter, but Jesse Gonzalez is also starting to get playing time, and they end up with a mix in goal of Kennedy making 16 starts, Seitz making 7, and Gonzalez making 11. So just like the season before, Pareja's trying to figure out who the guy's going to be.
Yeah, it was a strange one because it wasn't like at no point was there like a mix of anything. It was just, let me think. It was Sight started the season, played through that crazy, a certain crazy game that I'm sure we'll get to in a moment. Kennedy picks it up, and then suddenly Jesse's in the picture towards the end of the year, and you know, brings some particular highlights.
Well, 2015, speaking of highlights, is probably, I think, the peak year of Fabian Castillo. He has 9 goals and 9 assists in 2015. He's MLS Best 11, MLS All Stars, 2-time Player of the Week in the league. And to be fair, though, this probably is his peak season because this is the year he's really focused on FC Dallas, which maybe later is not so much. So he's one of the most key players on the team this season, and this is when fans are just going crazy about how good he is.
Definitely, I think you can't underestimate or undervalue the whole change in attitude that the Colombian national team took. They went in a very short time from we'll never pick a guy from MLS because it's a terrible league to picking Castillo and the Colombian media saying, hold on, maybe this guy could be the new Falcao when they eventually tried to play him up front.
Well, there's going to be a lot of talk about Castillo coming up. I know we'll be back to him for sure. Mauro Diaz in 2015 also has a really, really good season. As we mentioned, coming out of 2014, the signs were there. And in 2015, he plays one of his basically 2 healthy seasons where he plays 24 games. We'll come back to Diaz's health a lot later, too, as well. But he has 8 goals. Only 3 of them are from PKs, mind you, because he takes a lot of PKs. And 10 assists. That's a tremendous season. But at this point, he looks like he's really a quite special player, and Oscar is probably building the team around him as we move forward.
Definitely, definitely. A lot of pieces kind of brought in, particularly shoring up behind him and to the sides. Obviously, we mentioned Barrios to give that three-headed attack with Castillo, Rolando Escobar as an alternate option on the right. Kyle Becker brought in for behind. Obviously, Atiba Harris, he could play in midfield some. I mean, even they looked at Juan Toja even on trial that season. So
I've forgotten
really,
that.
yeah. I had two until I was writing up some notes and looked back at a trial game. Played 2 games, got booked in 2 games, and they said goodbye.
Wow. Well, we did mention that the defense was one of the question marks of this season, and Oscar still was still looking for answers. Hedges obviously is becoming the rock we know and love, and he makes the MLS Best 11. And really, Zach Lloyd is the only other constant, as we mentioned earlier. Zimmerman starts 10 games, Moises Hernandez starts 11. Hollingshead, who's a rookie, plays 25 games, but probably all over the place from left back to left wing and right back even. And then Javon Watson plays 22. So really, it's Hedges that's holding it all together. But considering how fluid the back line is, 2015 is actually the 4th time in club history they allowed less than 40 goals against. So something is working if it's all in flux.
Absolutely. I mean, like you say, Hedges really starting to come into his own. Zach Lloyd was a phenomenal player. And we talked about the disarray in goal, but you still have 3 starting quality keepers, which is such a rarity in any league.
Yeah, unfortunately, the offensive end is not quite as good yet. We're starting to see the wind down of Buzz Perez. He only ends up with 5 goals. And David Teixeira, however you want to pronounce his first name, depending on whether you want to anglicize it or not, has only 6 goals. So neither of those guys seems to be the answer. And I do wonder, in hindsight, Dan, how good this team might have been if they'd had a true peak 9, a question we've been asking for a long time about this club.
Yeah, definitely the start of Blaz is come down, which is crazy because he scored 3 goals in the first 2 games. I mean, he really pulled Dallas into the season. But um, yeah, I mean, we're still arguably looking for that full replacement 5 years later.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why we wonder is the Diaz Castillo Barrios set of three sort of behind Blas. They lead the team combined to 52 goals, which is the sixth best in club history. So you wonder how productive they would have been with a nine actually banging in goals at a consistent rate and finishing. And really, it's remarkable how Pareja was able to make the whole thing work, considering the roster still is in flux a little bit. I mean, Barrios only makes 19 starts as he's just come in. So Teixeira plays 19, Akindele starts 19, Akindele starts 14, Perez 14, Kellen Acosta, who's becoming a more major player, starts 19, Michelle starts 12. So the midfield pieces are still not locked in. And so really it's remarkable this team is as good as it is.
Definitely, I think especially you mentioned Tesho. He'd come off that Rookie of the Year season, looked absolutely phenomenal, and then he had that sophomore season slump, which gave Blas some more time on the field, gave David Teixeira some more time, and Teixeira is easily the most frustrating player that I've seen. Talk about a guy that you'd watch him in training and he's putting away these world-class finishes, and then it gets out onto the field and he can't score from a yard out.
Sounds familiar. The Open Cup isn't so good in 2015. They do knock off the OKC Energy, as they pretty much always do. But then we get one of the worst losses, not an upset loss, but it's one of the worst losses in club history when they get stomped into the ground by Sporting Kansas City by a 6-2 score line. Usually FC Dallas is pretty good in Open Cups, but this was a really, really poor one. Dom Dyer scores 4 goals and set a whole bunch of Kansas City records, in Open Cup records, and one of the most thorough beatings I've ever seen FC Dallas take in an Open Cup game.
Yeah, and I mean, as we'll find out as we go through it, Sporting Kansas City and FC Dallas is a fairly one-sided relationship in the Open Cup.
Yeah, it is.
But they were definitely raring to go. I think Dallas had a bit of a weakened lineup, if I remember rightly, but Dallas had also beaten SKC at home 3-1 in that second game of the season. Dom Dwyer's wife Sydney LaRue was there to scarf the statue. He misses a penalty. He's getting grief off the fans. Has an absolute mare. And I remember I was doing a profile on him that day. So I go into the SKC locker room and to speak to him, and Peter Vermees is pacing back and forth, playing on his phone. He's looking for a video of one of Blas's goals. He's like, I swear there was a player offside. And I just remember he said something to me. I'm like, no, there was at least 3 players offside in that goal.
Oh, well, there are some good wins, positive signature wins in 2015. Some of the ones that jumped out at me were the 4-1 win over Portland in July, and then the 2 beatings of Houston, both by a 4-1 scoreline, one in May and one in October.
Yeah, it's such a weird early season as well. You had a couple of good starts. You had that weird Colorado game where Colorado haven't scored all season so far, and then suddenly they put 4 up on Dallas. You've got the Toronto game straight after that, the 3-2 with the 3-hour weather delay.
I remember that game.
That was it was bizarre. There was nothing. Oh, and even the game against Columbus playing that starting the 5 homegrowns, and everyone's like, oh god, this is going to be terrible, and suddenly run out 3-0 winners,
right?
Despite arguably getting outplayed.
Yeah. Soccer is a weird game sometimes in that regard. Nonetheless, FC Dallas finishes October with a 4-0-1 run, which gets them to 60 points. So all this chaos we've been talking about, and they get to 60 points, which is the most in club history. And they win the West, but they lose out to the Supporters' Shield on a tiebreaker to the New York Red Bulls. So all in all, despite the chaos we've talked about, and really Oscar's still trying to figure out what his pieces are, particularly defensively, you're still talking about one of the best seasons in club history and a point total we've never seen before.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird because it's this great height of 60 points was that. I mean, obviously it's not now. We've had teams hit 70, but 60 points was that magic marker that the teams had to try and achieve, and to see two teams do it was great. To see FC Dallas do it against the odds was fantastic. Although the Red Bulls having a slightly easier schedule while the East was pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Kind of it was a weird dampener. Obviously a lot of people upset that they missed out on a significant trophy that's that season, but which kind of overshadowed the achievement. Obviously, even more so, something that came a couple of weeks after would overshadow that even further.
Yeah, the 2015 playoffs are really quite epic. Round one is against Seattle. Dallas goes up to Seattle for game one in Seattle and loses 2-1, although Castillo gets a road goal. And then game two is really something special, and it is one of the marquee games in this franchise's history, honestly. Akindelli puts Dallas up 1-0 in the 84th minute, according to the stat sheet, only for Chad Marshall to come back in 90th minute and it seems steal the game. But no, it's not over because Walker Zimmerman has come in and he scores the go-ahead goal a minute later, almost as Seattle is still not quite, but still celebrating in that kind of frame of mind, certainly, to force overtime. This goal does, and eventually they get to PKs, and then Zimmerman converts the winning PK, and this game is right up there with the 1999 playoff game as one of the best and most exciting games in club history.
Certainly, the last 5 minutes being the most exciting.
Yes, maybe a snoozer for the first 80.
Yeah, everyone talks about it being a great game, and honestly, I don't remember anything before the 84th minute. But it was so up and out. It was the second season the MLS is using away goals. FC Dallas fell victim to it the year before in Seattle when they played to a boring 0-0 to steal it. But you've got Tesho scores and suddenly FC Dallas are going through on away goals. Chad Marshall scores and suddenly there is no away goals. It's just Seattle are going through on aggregate, and then the way that Walker finished it up, and that was it was like they were just throwing everything in the box, and it was a corner that actually got headed away, and Blas just sticks a foot out, plays it back over his head for Walker. It's one of those goals that just had no right to even be there.
Yeah. Nonetheless, it is a crazy exciting end. And while you're right, I don't remember the game much at all until Akindelli scored, but the end certainly was just intense. And I remember the overtime being intense too, so it was a hell of a game. In the end, the last bit. The second round, however, is not so great. FC Dallas loses 3-1 to the Timbers in Portland, which pretty much ends it before they even do anything else. But they do play game two, and they end up being a 2-2 tie, and FC Dallas is eliminated 5-3 on aggregate. And so a season of 60 points comes to a not so great conclusion.
No, it was rough, and what made it worse is it was the first leg. Nat Borchers scores off a corner in injury time, and it was just a case that they fell asleep in the last minute of the away leg, and then a 2-goal deficit was just too much to overcome.
Yeah, particularly against a Portland team that's pretty good at that point. So moving on to 2016 and getting past the disappointing end of 2015, 2016, Pareja and Calvillo keep streamlining the team. Michelle is gone. David Teixeira, who's a disappointment, as you say, is gone. Dan Kennedy's gone. Rolando Escobar is gone. Once again, they take advantage of the reentry draft. It's 2 years in a row, because usually the reentry draft is worthless, but 2 years in a row, FC Dallas takes advantage. This time they pick up Maxi Urruti, who turns out to be a massive part of the team going forward, and he has a great season with 9 goals and 4 assists. That's a fantastic pickup from a usually totally unregarded reentry draft.
Yeah, it was such a fortunate thing. Portland had really built up that team for the Cup run, and Urruti had a guarantee the next season that would have put them well over the cap, and they had to decline his option. So Dallas trades up to get that number one spot in the re-entry draft, and I want to say there were only like three picks in that draft in the end.
Yeah, the re-entry draft is usually worthless for the most part. So it's remarkable that 2 years in a row they took advantage of it and got a good piece. So in addition, in 2016, Maynor Figueroa comes in, who turns out to be a terrific pickup. Mauro Rosales comes in. He's an amazing bench piece this one season. But the biggest addition of the season comes with the holding mid superstar. Carlos Gruezo comes in, and this is the first sort of lockdown holding mid since Daniel Hernandez had been in with the club, and is the number two holding mid in the club history according to our panel. You know, they had tried other options. They had tried Peter Lucene, but then he hurt his knee, and then they went through Victor Ulloa, who we love but isn't a world class six. So the addition of Carlos Gruezo, not in a stat terms, but I think you and I, and certainly on this podcast, we all the time talk about how valuable this guy is over the next 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah, just in the way he shut down plays and allowed. We talk a lot about a double pivot versus a single six, and just how having him there allowed a Yoa or whoever we was playing alongside to just get forward and kind of get involved in the possession side of the game. His distribution was fine. It was above average, but just as a shutdown player and an enforcer. I mean, he picked up so many yellow cards, but he also knew when to go through the back of someone and stop them messing around.
Yeah, his as you say, his time with FC Dallas allowed Pareja and then Luchi later to play a single pivot 4-3-3 versus a 4-2-3-1. It moves a player 10 yards further up the field, and that can make a big difference. The most interesting thing for me, statistically speaking, on this season was evident when I was looking at the stats going back, is that Pareja gets his lineup dialed in 2016. Instead of this wide variety of players playing, we actually only see 14 players get more than 15 starts. So he's very dialed in with his 12, 13, 14 man group, and then we have Rosales as a consistent sub. And that's pretty much it, honestly. Other than that, it's like a spattering of plays here or there. It's the focus of the lineups this year that really stood out to me in hindsight.
Yeah, I mean it's a hallmark of a champion, right? Trying to have consistency, but know there is depth there to rely on if you need to.
So this is Mauro Diaz's second straight, mostly uninjured season. We'll get back to that. Mostly. He starts 24 games and plays 27 total. He has 5 goals and 13 assists in league play. 2016 clearly is peak Mauro Diaz in Dallas. This is as good as it got for Diaz in Dallas.
Yeah, and it definitely helped you. You've got Castillo is carrying on his form. Barrios had kind of kicked into gear halfway through 2015, and he's really come on. And, for Diaz, it's just a case of the ball comes to him, and he can flick a ball to the left, he can flick a ball to the right, and that one of those two players is getting in behind. It is, when we see it, after Castillo's departure, really up until this season, that balance on the wings was such a huge part of Dallas' success.
Yeah, between Urruti and Diaz and Barrios and Castilla and Kellen Acosta as the 8, you're looking at an offense that scores 50 goals, which is a fantastic level of production. And, of course, Diaz is the keystone of that and the thing that's kind of holding it all together most of the time. And the whole offense is really flowing this season. The defense too is also dialed in. This is how you make championship teams, both offense and defense. Hedges earns the only MLS Defender of the Year award for this club, playing in the middle, and Walter Zimmerman is starting most of the time in the middle with him. Atiba Harris is on the right. Maynor Figueroa is often commonly on the left, but we also see Ryan Hollingshead start like 20-something games, some at left back, some at other places. Zach Lloyd is still in the mix as a great piece, although he's starting to miss a lot of playing time with injuries. And together this group, and you can include Grezzo in that, and you can include the goalkeepers in this, and this group only allows 40 goals defensively, and that's the fifth best in club history.
Oh, yeah, definitely a lot of consistency there. Even I know Gyasi really missed out that season. He had that ahead of Mexico Olympic squad camp, lost the start to sites, and then
Yeah, it's mostly
come,
sites this year.
yeah, and then Gyasi got the start again, played 2 games and got injured again. It's good for a defense to know the tendencies of who they're playing in front of. You know a keeper's shouts, and Gyasi, it was. I mean, he still is. He's still working on his communication and
Yeah.
his control of the box. We don't, you kind of talk about that more in other leagues than MLS, but it's such an important part, particularly on set pieces, an area that sometimes Dallas struggled in.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Jesse's and still is today in his low 20s. You're talking about keepers who usually peak later than field players. You will say 26 to 29 is the peak. Keepers, it's more like 28 to 32 is their peak. So Jesse even today is only 24, 25. So he's not even, he's got another 3 or 4 seasons before he hits his peak. And back in 2016, he's still a baby in a lot of keeper terms. So in and out of the lineup, it's some troubles with him, and Sites is still a really reliable piece. So, when you combine that inexperience or the flux there with, the defense being locked in, 40 goals is a surprising low total, and really is one of the best defenses we've ever seen, which is why when you have a championship team, there aren't a lot of midseason additions. There's only one that's really worth talking about, and that's Aubrey David, who comes in and makes us on loan from Deportivo Saprissa, and he makes a solid contribution down the stretch defensively.
Yeah, he was kind of a victim of circumstance for just how many good players were back there. I would have liked to have seen FC Dallas keep him, but you can't talk too much about impact mid-season signings and not talk about Carlos Ruiz.
Well, they only played one game, but okay, I'll go ahead. Carlos Ruiz.
And he scored in it.
He did
scored the
score
winner,
yeah.
and he won the Supporters' Shield with it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, I mean, you win the Supporters' Shield for the whole season, but that was such an odd signing when they brought him back. I was like, really? What are we doing? And then he came in the game and celebrated like he did. It is one of the more. I mean, when you look at the context, it's like you literally signed that guy and paid him whatever you paid him. I don't remember, for one game and one goal.
hey, it's worth it if it wins something.
Yeah,
and I mean, to not have to go into LA on that last day, knowing that you would need to win to prevent Colorado winning it, and suddenly seeding changes and everything else. Just a huge moment.
Well, we talked about goalkeepers earlier, and one of the signature moments of 2016 comes in a loss in Toronto, and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, Dan. Dallas is out of subs, and they're forced to put Luchi Gonzalez gets knocked out of the game, and they're forced to put Ryan Hollingshead in net in the 89th minute. Now, Hollingshead does an admirable job for a field player. He makes one save, and he ends the game with a 0.00 GAA, which, by the way, Dan, ties a club record held by, and this is my favorite part, held by Chris Bondi from back in 2003. Both Hollingshead and Bondi are left backs. So there's a odd confluence of left back turned goalkeeper field players for this club.
Wow, I did not know that start. That was a really interesting game though. It was the end of a 3-game skid. They'd lost in Vancouver and 3-0, and then went to the Red Bulls and lost 4-0 in the same week, and then to go to Toronto and have that happen, and it was kind of like a rallying point. You had Will Johnson knees Luchi Gonzalez in the head, puts him out of the game. Not like FC Dallas fans needed any more reason to hate Will Johnson from his time in Portland. And then to see that suddenly, it definitely helped as a rallying cry to get Dallas back into good form, and that was really their only skid.
Yeah, 2016 is a great season, and we mentioned the Supporters Shield win, which we'll circle back to at the end of the season part. But 2016 also is, of course, a great Cup run, a very special Cup run. Now FC Dallas beats Oklahoma City Energy to start it, as they often do. Then they beat the Colorado Rapids at home and here in Frisco. And then they go down to Houston and beat the Houston Dynamo. Then they go to LA and beat the LA Galaxy. And in the final, they get to play New England Revolution here in Dallas. And this is the second U.S. Open Cup for this franchise. But in particular in this game, the thing I noticed, and I recently watched this game again, this single individual game, probably for me, Mauro Diaz's a masterpiece FC Dallas moment. This is the peak game of his career and his time in hoops for me.
Yeah, what was it like? He had 3 assists and 1 goal from the 4.
Yeah, scored a goal and had all the assists in the game for Dallas.
It's funny. I know I mentioned this to you yesterday, but I remember the cup run being this whole triumphant thing. But you think they enter in the 4th round, they go to penalties with Oklahoma City, and Zach Lloyd gets that elbow to the head that permanently puts them on the shelf. They they play Colorado at home, and they go to, I think the winner was in stoppage in extra time. They go to Houston, and it was a 91st minute winner. They go to the last minute of extra time in LA before having the actual dominant performance. It was the cup run that should never have happened, but went all the way.
I suppose that's the nature of cup runs, isn't it? It takes sometimes crazy Herculean efforts to get a cup won, and there's a reason why even a club like FC Dallas that puts a lot of weight in it has only managed to put it away twice. I think they've been to the quarterfinals the most of any club. Something like, I want to say it's something ridiculous, like 15 times or something they've been to the quarterfinals. You know, it's hard to pull it over the line, and they got it done this time. And as I say, I think that was Morrow's best game. Unfortunately, 2 things go wrong. Down as good as this season is looking and as good as things are going, there are 2 major problems that occur over the stretch run. And we will talk about both of them. The first one is that, as you've alluded to earlier, is that Fabian Castillo does a Siegfried and Roy vanishing act off to Turkey without club permission, and it basically forces the club to sell him to Trabzonspor, which I'm probably mispronouncing.
Trash can what?
Trash can what? What a debacle this entire thing is. And I don't know that Fabian Castillo's reputation isn't permanently ruined by this, because he's basically been a nomad since then.
Oh, it is definitely ruined. I don't know if he's still with the same agent, but he really shouldn't be. It was weird because, I mean, obviously, you know, once he got in the national team, he's getting all the attention. I remember Dan Hunt talking about, yeah, we had a bid from Olympiacos. It was like 3.5 million. You know, I want to push him closer to 10. And then, you know, his agent kidnaps him essentially, and forces Dallas into a deal where they only get $500,000 more than what Olympiacos bid in the first place. It was just
Yeah, I remember sitting at home, you know, working on articles and such, and seeing these tweets of photos of him at Trabzonspor signing contracts and
in that weird dark room.
Yeah, and you're like, dude, he's under contract. You can't sign another contract. So it was a mess. And now this stuff happens in soccer, and I, like you, blame his horrific agent. But you know, he played a couple of seasons there, and then he went to Cholos for a couple of seasons, and now he's off again. And I know Oscar lost a lot of faith with him and felt really betrayed by the whole thing. I mean, he let Fabian live in his house for a couple of years when the kid was 18. And it really was just an utter disaster. And that, of course, brings us down to the second horrific problem of the second half of 2016. And that's when Mauro Diaz tears his Achilles on October 16th versus Seattle in the penultimate game of the year. And this is the real tragedy, this loss of Diaz down the stretch.
Yeah, it was a strange one, because I mean, it's what, it's the last home game, so it's just minutes after Carlos Ruiz has scored that goal. So late in the game that he goes down, and Dallas doesn't bother to make a substitution because we're right at the very end of it. It was,
Yeah.
and it was horrible. I remember like, people were incredibly distraught and blaming Tyrone Mears for a tackle. And oh, he fouled him, he kicked him, he injured him, and it was like it's an Achilles tendon tear. It's actually how Mauro Diaz plants his leg, and we know that Mauro Diaz's legs have been a long-term issue that the club have been working on, and you know, it was weird. I don't think, in the grand scheme of things, I don't go as far as people to say that was what cost FC Dallas MLS Cup, but it's such a huge blow to lose such an influential player.
Yeah, this is the second straight 60-point season, as you mentioned. It's the first in MLS history, back-to-back 60-point seasons. And it's the first ever and only supporter shield in club history. So, again, amazing season. And I was going to ask you if you bought into the treble hype that Diaz costed them the cup. I think it's a combination of Castillo's departure and Diaz getting hurt that derails this season at the very end and is what prevents them from doing well in the playoffs.
I'm gonna actually go a step further.
All right.
We all right. So we both absolutely love Oscar Pareja, personally and professionally. Um, but he goes to Seattle and he plays a back five with three
Yeah.
sixes above it. You are not winning anything
Yeah, they
doing
do
that.
lose that game 1 3-0, which sets a bad tone against their new bogey team. It used to be the Rapids with a bogey team, but now it's Seattle's the bogey team. They lose 3-0 in Seattle, and then they come back home and win 2-1, but that's not enough, and you're eliminated 4-2. And so one of the best seasons in club history, arguably the best season in club history, is derailed.
Yeah, and it's a shame because Oscar had a very big problem with two-legged cup games. Which is a shame. Now we're on a one-legged system that we didn't get to see how he handled that in Dallas. But also, like, MLS made such a big deal about what home advantage is, and to me, home advantage is setting the tone. It's not how you finish it. You go to Seattle and you're
Yep.
3-0 down. That's the home advantage because you're not going to beat them 4-0.
Yeah, you're definitely not going to beat them 4-0. When you get stomped and that's the trouble is if you get stomped in game one. Now, if you steal game one, you're rosy. But if you get stomped in game one, it's over. And this is just a perfect example of that. So that brings us to 2017. And now, the most important thing to understand about 2017, and Dan, you know this, we've talked about it many times, but for those fans that aren't really super aware of the depth of how this league works, the most important thing about 2017 is that FC Dallas is playing in the 2016 and 2017 CONCACAF Champions League. Now, they're in this because because they were the 2015, going way back, Western Conference champs. They got into the 2016-17 CONCACAF Champions League. It's out of sync with the MLS calendar. So technically, they start that championship, the CCL, during 2016 season, and they're in a group with Real Estali, which is from Nicaragua, and CD Suchitepeques, which I'm butchering the shit out of, Suchitepeques, which is a Guatemalan club. So FC Dallas, under Oscar and in the great 2016 season, they smoke both those teams. They don't lose a game. And they advance to the knockout stage, which is important because that all sets up 2017. And I know you know this bit, Dan, and so it's because the strategy as you're setting up your next MLS season becomes an emphasis on the Champions League because you've now advanced to the knockout stage. So Dallas changes their mentality a little bit and changes their strategy a little bit. And in the big picture, this will make them double down on the academy in the long run. But in the short run, for 2017, it means they go older. They go spend a little more money. And they bring in Javier Morales. They bring in Roland Lamar. They go spend some money on Christian Coleman. They get an old vet in Hernan Grana. They try and spend some money on Anibal Chala, which doesn't work out. They bring in Carlos Cremio. So they bring in some veteran experience and some talent they spend some money on. And this is a couple of these guys pan out, but most of them don't. And it's definitely a philosophical change from what Oscar had been doing and what the team now does 100% even more, isn't it?
it was a weird preseason in general. Obviously, and Oscar was straight up about it. There was an older trend because of the cup competitions, but they're just reacting to the Weston McKennie going to Schalke thing. So they've panic signed Paxton.
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
in
really, since you bring that up, really, it's Reggie Cannon, Brian Reynolds, Jesus Ferrer, and Paxton Pomykal are all signed between the end of 2016 and the start of 2017. That window in reaction to McKinney, so it's a homegrown investment, sort of.
but they're also, they're trying to bring in like proven CONCACAF players. Jose Salvatierra, who plays for Costa Rica, comes in, signs as a left back. Now, I've always heard that he turned up a little bit inebriated to his medical, and they
Oof.
immediately sent him packing. He now plays for Costa Rica at left back. They then go to Anibal Shala from LDUQ.
Yeah, LDQ,
Yeah.
whatever.
And he's playing for Ecuador now. But
He got hurt in the preseason here, and then
which
took off, and that's a whole other.
Which again, a weird preseason because they go down to that was the year they went down to Argentina and played like 11 games in 10 days.
Right. Well, the reason they do that is because, as we've said, FC Dallas is now in the knockout phase of the CONCACAF Champions League, and the first round is in February. So before MLS camps, or even most MLS camps are just barely opening, Dallas is already playing competitive games. Now they draw Arabe Unido, which is a Panamanian team who they managed to knock off, and that sets up a game against Pachuca in the semifinals. Now, the leg one is in Frisco, and Maxi Ruti and Kellen Acosta score, and Dallas wins. For Pachuca, scoring on the other side is Franco Jara, which kicks off the Dan Hunt infatuation with Franco Jara. And leg two is back down in Mexico, where Jara scores again. And then only for Christian Coleman of all people to tie the game. Unfortunately, our old friend of Chucky Lozano, who most people will know, nets twice to steal the game. So perhaps a moral victory that you were good against Pachuca, who went on to win the whole thing. But nonetheless, by March, April, FC Dallas has already played all these games and is out of the CONCACAF Champions League after signing all these veteran players to try to make a run at it.
Yeah, it was. They were two great games, for sure. And as we see, this is all stuff that contributes to how the season ends.
Yes, it does.
I don't know if you want to just cut this to the chase. It was weird because we keep talking about trending older, but the team are building up the year of Kellen.
Yeah,
and. This whole weird thing of, Mauro Diaz has been out for 6 months and the team's playing better without him. They've figured out how to not play a true 10. They're playing more of a
they built
4-4-2, 4-3-3 and kind of just adapting.
They built this championship team to not have Diaz because they knew he wouldn't be back. It's all part of it. And as you say, Kellen Acosta has a really good season, and he is part of their big push to promote their own players, which is fine. So, in the midst of all this quality Champions League start, FC Dallas, as you say, is playing great. And they start the season on a killer run, 5-0-4, undefeated through May 14th. And keep in mind, they were eliminated in only April from the CONCACAF Champions League. And going all the way through July, they're still 9-3-7. So through the first half of this season, remarkable season. It's going great.
So far.
But then, as we've alluded to, the wheels start coming off. And most of us, in hindsight, assume it's a combination of age of the squad, season fatigue because of the length, because of the Champions League, the post-Champions League depression from losing to Pachuca. There's a heavier workload early on because of the load of games and the travel internationally. Unfortunately, from July 29th on, we're looking at one of the most epic collapses in league history. The team only wins 2 more games from July 29th on, and they finish the game 2-7-6 and miss the playoffs. It is one of the greatest collapses we've ever seen.
I mean, just to illustrate, you can go back a week before that. July 22nd, Christian Coleman scores 2 goals. Should have been a hat trick. That disallowed goal was crap. To put FC Dallas top of the West.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, the problems on this team, to me, in hindsight, and looking at the stats this last week when I was researching, they seem to be mostly defensive. 48 goals allowed is tied for the sixth worst in club history. That's not very good. On the offensive end, Maxi Urruti has 12 goals. That's the most since Jeff Cunningham had the Golden Boot in 2009. And Roland Lamah, who is a negative player in my estimation, manages to manages to score 11 goals. And Michael Barrios has an amazing season with 14 assists. So the offense is there. It's just the defense that is in tatters. And I think it's because of combinations of a couple of young guys who Oscar starts to lose faith in, and also a couple of old guys who fall apart. Herman Grana, to me in particular, is really poor over the second half. The defense is just not getting it done. And maybe also a combination of Gyasi being really, really young still, of course, which doesn't always inspire great confidence.
You also had times where Mino Figueroa is playing as a centre back, and yet he's drifting out as if he's playing as a left back and leaving a massive gap in the middle. Atiba Harris is kind of playing like a bit of a liability sometimes. Kellen Acosta as a defensive midfielder, he comes back from the Gold Cup and it all starts to unravel. It was, and then like you say, you've got this team that have been non-stop since January, and they're just starting to wear down.
Yeah, I think the length of the season and how long it took and the hangover from the Champions League, I think that's the biggest part of it. The age of the squad, particularly the guys that are playing a lot, is a little bit up there. Needless to say, with this meltdown of a season, FC Dallas misses the playoffs for the first time under Pareja, and only the 7th time in club history, which I think is impressive out of 25 seasons. And the craziest thing that happens is, Dan, is right at the end, right before it's all going to go down the drain, Dallas stomps the crap out of the LA Galaxy 5-1 on the last game of the season. I mean, that's a fun moment, but hardly makes up for missing the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, the Galaxy at that point were one of the worst teams in the history of the league. They'd fallen off the back of all their stars. It was such a weird game because, everything's suddenly looking great. There was a whole celebration. The supporters groups are leaving things in the locker room for the players,
Ooh.
And the players' families are getting involved with that. And suddenly it's like Dallas is about to sneak the last playoff spot.
Yeah.
And the game finishes and they're still in the playoff spot. And then Chris Wondolowski scores a 93rd minute winner against Minnesota to just sneak and past on, is it wins or goal difference was the tiebreaker?
I don't remember, but it's something. Yeah, tiebreaker.
But it was, I mean, I remember I was on the field for, who was it? Somebody was getting an award. I can't remember. I don't know. So I remember speaking to a couple of players, and they were just deflated.
Yeah.
Like that win meant nothing because of what they'd found out after it. Not because of the whole season, just because that glimmer of hope was extinguished.
Yeah, for 5 minutes it was so good, and then it wasn't. Well, in the midst of all this horrible season, the cup run is also crap. FC Dallas beat the Tulsa Roughnecks this time to get into as their first meeting of the cup, and then they knocked off the Colorado Rapids as usual, as they almost always do in the cup, not the playoffs, just the Open Cup. And then, of course, once again, they lose to Sporting Kansas City, although this time it's only 3-0. But this is an era of losing to Sporting Kansas City in the Open Cup, and that continues.
All 3 games and all 3 goals in extra time. 0-0 at 90 minutes. It was a weird one as well. It was that game where SKC's owner had just died in I think a helicopter crash or something the week before. So it was like a really somber occasion. And then Maxi Urruti picks up a second yellow, trying a bicycle kick and kicking Ike Capara's head off. And then there's sort of the SKC players are already kind of heated, with all the emotion in the stadium, and they're trying to drag him off the field. And, Maxi's there like in tears, like trying to find out if Kapara is okay, and he's hanging around outside the locker room for updates and all this. It was a weird game for so many reasons.
Well, the other notable win that I picked up on was the 6-2 Roland Lamar hat trick game against RSL back in June. Shortly after Mauro Diaz started to see the field again, he came on the sub in this game in particular. High water mark for Lamar getting that hat trick, a player who, for my money, was a waste having in Dallas his entire time there. But it is a big, impressive win to beat RSL, who is almost always a good team, by such a high margin.
Jesus Ferrer's first goal.
That's true. It is. At the time, was he the youngest goal in FC Dallas history? I think that still holds up, and maybe one of the...
Yeah, he was the second in league history at the time.
Yeah. All right, 2017 is a season to forget. One of the great collapses in MLS history, unfortunately. Some of the league guys love to talk about that still. So 2018, little do we know at the time that this is Oscar Pareja's last season with FC Dallas. But Dallas goes back to their younger, homegrown draft pick, young signing style that we know today. And with really just the one 2017 blurb where they kind of moved away from it a little bit. Herman Grana is out. Javier Morales is out. Carlos Cerminio is out. Atiba Harris is out. Chris Seitz is out. And Walker Zimmerman, who Pareja had lost faith with in 2017, are all in the way out. Now, it's hard to I found it hard in hindsight to remember exactly what Zimmerman did to lose faith, but it definitely was, as the season collapse started to happen, all of a sudden Zimmerman was out of the lineup and really was never much part of the team after that, and they ended up trading him.
Yeah, it was weird. I remember he sprained his MCL. That was a very real thing. He was out for a couple of games. And then this was a time where I was going to practice very regularly, and we were all, I'd be the only one out. And I talked to Oscar, asked for an update on certain players, and he'd be one of them. He said, "Oh yeah, his knee's still bothering him." And then Walker Zimmerman would walk out, and this was like a weekly occurrence. Walker Zimmerman would come out afterwards. "No, my knee's fine. I don't know why I'm not playing."
Wow.
And so he'd come on as sub every so often, and that was really it. And they fell out. I mean, Oscar's fallen out of a lot of players. He doesn't, he likes to be an authority figure. He doesn't like players maybe getting too uppity. He's obviously told us both about, South American players not wanting to be on the bench, and Anibal Chala was a perfect example of that. But he seemed to get in that with Zimmerman too, and they both wanted out of that relationship.
I do wonder, in hindsight, if Walker Zimmerman might not be the prototypical spoiled American athlete, because he seems to have worn out his welcome in LA too. They were more than happy to move him on, it seems, this offseason to Nashville. So I do wonder about that, and you would think that he'd be a bigger part of the national team than he is based on his talent. So there are questions there for me.
A big problem with Walker Zimmerman, and this is probably, I thought, he kind of could project it being better than Hedges. I thought in his last season he had a better season than Hedges, but he was a freak athlete that had a very regular brain fart.
Yeah. Good for a brain fart. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it was one of his first appearances, but a game against Portland in the Open Cup where he tries to play this weird back pass that made no sense whatsoever in the context of the game, was so far short, and then just stands there and watches a Portland player run onto it and score into an empty net.
Yeah, I think that for those of us that were around the team enough, and this is more you than me, I think we knew, I didn't make it out as much in 2017, but we knew that the writing was on the wall with Zimmerman. Once Oscar quit playing him, that was going to be, you knew it was coming. All right, anyway,
FC Dallas, to $1 million for him. So.
Yeah, well, they made good business out of the deal, that's for sure, when you combine all the pieces that moved around. So FC Dallas drafts a couple of GA players, Francis Atuahene and Emmanuel Amasi, who are both still around. Chris Richards and Brandon Cervania are both signed as homegrowns. This is for 2018. Jimmy Maurer is signed to back up Jesse Gonzalez. Jesse, who has taken over in 2017, if we didn't make that clear, Santiago Mosquera is signed, who's a young, interesting player. Interesting, but maybe he hasn't paid off yet. But the two biggest signings of the 2018 offseason are on defense, and they're both meant to help reconstruct the defense that we talked about being so poor in 2017. And that's Anton Nedyakov and Reto Ziegler, who are both terrific right out of the gate. Let's talk about Ziegler first, Dan, and what he brought to the table and still brings to the table to this day as a veteran World Cup experience, quality center back, good feet, good brain, a leader for the back line.
Yeah, Ziegler, first and foremost, a hugely experienced player, Premier League experience, Serie A experience, 2 World Cups, a cultured left foot, great distribution out the back, which was something that the FC Dallas had been trying to build upon. Even today at 34, he's still got it. But it's also a cushion to allow Dallas to bring in some younger defenders a little bit later on to inherit the role.
Yeah, the other signing for the defense that we just talked about, Anton Nedyakov, is a bizarre story. Now, out of the gate, he looks fantastic. I love the way he plays. I love his mentality. I love his toughness. And then at some point, he gets hurt and sort of vanishes, and we don't really hear much about him in terms of even like rehab. We don't see him rehabbing until we find out that he basically has flown back home and now wants out and wants to sign, be sold back to a team in Bulgaria. In his place, FC Dallas does an emergency sign of Marquinhos Pedrosa to play left back, a Brazilian. But again, this is just a bizarre mid-season debacle of a transfer situation for a guy that looked so good when he joined the team.
Yeah, it was strange. I mean, I think Nedyakov was maybe he didn't understand the situation that his girlfriend wouldn't get a visa to join him in the US because they're not married. So when he gets injured, that whole forearm deal or collarbone, whatever it was, the team gives him permission to go back and to see her, and then he's like, "No, I kind of want to stay here now."
Yeah. It's funny how often, Dan, we don't talk about off-field stuff, but off-field stuff can make such a big difference for players. Their happiness. When you're talking about a transfer for a player, do they want to go or not? Where do they want to be? I mean, we always talk about players and, oh, this guy should go here and that guy should go there. Well, what does the player want to do? And this is just another case where he just wasn't happy here. He wasn't, working for him. And as much as we liked him on the field, it just was like, he's like, you know what? I don't want to come back. It
No, I
happens.
mean it's huge, and the more time you spend like in this side of the game, the more you see it. The old adage used to be, expect a player to have a terrible year if he moves in with a girlfriend and has a significant change in situation, or they have a kid, or any of those high stress things that maybe leave us a little less engaged and primed for physical activity, I guess.
Yeah, the whole balance of one's life is important, no matter what one does for a living, and that's true. And as a professional soccer player, isn't anything for else. Right. So 2015 is the breakout season for a certain homegrown named Reggie Cannon, Reginald Cannon at right back. Speaking of players who've had a recent life change, he goes from playing just 1 minute, one single minute in 2017 to becoming the full-time lockdown starter in 2018. That's a remarkable leap for a young man.
Yeah, and we sort of talked about Hernan Grana's season loan, and we knew that Grana was effectively there to groom Reggie Cannon as his immediate successor, and I mean, Reggie became marathon man. He wanted to play every minute. He was upset when he couldn't. It was sometimes he needs to get out of his own way. Sometimes, like the time he tried to hobble out with a horribly swollen ankle and argue with the training staff that he was okay to play.
My favorites are the ones where he's clutching his hamstring and stays in the game. It's like, dude, sub out. But that's Reggie being
I,
Reggie.
I mean, he's. I don't think I've known a more intense player. Like to the point where the Dallas Beer Guardians gave him their Player of the Year award, and he was in tears accepting it because he was not for anything anything specific. He was just really pissed off that he thought he had a bad game.
Yeah. Reggie, love the kid. One of the
Yeah.
best interviews in the club history too, because he's so savvy and understands how things work. And even as a young man, one of the most requested players in the franchise. FC Dallas in 2018 is also again in the CONCACAF Champions League, although there's a slight tweak in the way the Champions League works. There is no 2017 component of it. It's just 2018. They're in that obviously as the 2016, as bizarre as this is, double champ, Shield and Cup winners. They're in the 2018 Champions League. It was a time of transition. Don't get overcomplicated here with it. But they have to start play again in February against their what is apparently their CONCACAF Champions League nemesis, or one of two. Pachuca's the other one, but this one is Taro FC, which is a Panamanian club. Taro just loves to knock FCD out of the CONCACAF Champions League. They lose the first leg down in Panama 1-0, but they come home and you think, oh, this is going to be fine. We're going to win this home game, but nope. They win 3-2, but that means they lose the knockout because of the road goals rule, and the series is tied 3-3. And but they're out because the Taro scores twice in Frisco. So a debacle of a Champions League run against a team that you should from Panama beat and don't.
And it was a weird time because they were trying to use that 3-5-2 as well, which lasted really that game, and that was it.
Yeah, painful.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I remember just speaking to most of the defenders after the game, and they were all just confused. No one knew their cues, when to get forward, when to get back in that formation. So it was a formation that they definitely could have worked on, but it wasn't the right time to try it out.
Well, the Open Cup in 2018 isn't much better. Dallas knocks off San Antonio FC down in San Antonio. That was a fun game, but they lose to Sporting Kansas City again. This is the third time in 4 seasons they're knocked out by Sporting Kansas City. The other time, of course, they won the whole thing. This one is a 3-2 loss when Daniel Solori has a brace for Kansas City.
I don't even remember the game. It was that uneventful.
Yeah,
it's funny. Obviously we've both sort of gone back and looked over the seasons and made some notes. And 2018, I have next to nothing for. It was a weirdly unremarkable season.
Yeah, we'll come back to this in a bit, but I think we talk a lot around these parts about coaching cycles. And it's clear that Pareja's team had risen up 2015, 2016 peaks, and then 2017 it falls off the table. And 2018 is almost like a season of just waiting for the next wave to start. And this is exemplified by the mid-season moves, which come fast and furious. And the first of which is that Mauro Diaz asked to be sold to a club in UAE because they're going to pay him $3 million instead of just under $1 million that he was making in Dallas. And Dallas is more than happy to let him go. And to be fair, as good as he was in 2016 when they won the double, and as good as he could be in moments, and the modern game is moving away from pure tens, and the guy played no defense at all. But more importantly for me, this is the thing that kills him in terms of where he stands in Dallas's hierarchy of talent, is that he only started 50% of the games in which he was eligible to play for this club. And for me, if you can't start, if you're a player that's as good as he is, or he is supposed to be, and as important to the team as he is, or is supposed to be, if you can only start 50% of the games, then how can the team count on you and build around you? It just can't be done. And I think that's the legacy he leaves in Dallas.
It's also such an important role, and he didn't score an open play goal in his last 2 calendar years.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah. As talented as he was, I just think his tenure in the club, other than the fact that they won 2 trophies in the one season, he managed to stay healthy until the end. It just, most of the time, it just was ineffective and in and out in a mix and not somebody you could rely on, and that kills it. And after Diaz is gone, Kellen Acosta, who has been playing poorly for a year or more, asked to be traded, and the club is not too. Oscar Pareja is upset about it, but I don't think the club is too upset about it. And they trade Acosta to Colorado, essentially for Dom Badji.
Yeah, it was an interesting deal. Kellen definitely, he wanted to get out of town. There were a few things going on.
Again, off field, right? Personal life.
Yeah,
We don't
exactly.
need to get into
Personal
it, but it's
stuff
the same thing.
well, personal and professional. Because professionally, he just needed to get a new start
Yeah.
to not be. He'd lost his place in the national team. He was kind of struggling. He had the opportunity to go somewhere where they would, effectively build a team around him.
Yeah.
And Dallas tried to make the most of it. They loaded the deal so that if Kellen went to Europe, which was the expectation,
Yeah.
that they would get a significant chunk of the fee, have Badji and the international pick that later became Callum Montgomery. We can all talk about, did it look like a good deal at the time? Does it look like a good deal now? But it was a guy that wanted to get out of town. That was really the crux of it.
Yeah, I remember him saying that he had lost the joy in playing, that he wasn't
Yeah.
enjoying soccer. And when that happens, you need to reset your brain, reset your life. I get that. And so I don't begrudge him that. And I think it was clear in the way he was playing that he had lost that joy. And obviously, as a homegrown guy from the academy here and a former player here, we love him and we want him to do great things. We want him to be successful and we want him to be happy. And I hope that he's found that on and off the field and makes a good life for himself professionally and personally. His personal details are not something we care about enough to get into, but certainly he was affected by things, and certainly he had lost his joy. And if he's finding it, that's a positive. That's a win. All right. In 2018, Matt Hedges is the team's only All-Star, but the one good thing we can say about that season is this might actually be Maxi Urruti's best year with FC Dallas. He has 8 goals and 11 assists. Now, Maxi was always more of a false nine, if you will. In hindsight, I look back at his tenure in FC Dallas, and I wish we could have seen at least one season with him playing as a off striker to a real 9. Like if he'd have had a Blas and Blas's peak FC Dallasness, a guy to work off of. Now, unfortunately, FC Dallas hasn't played in a 2-striker system in years, but I don't know how you feel about it. I always wanted to see Maxi as a second striker.
I mean, the guy that they acquired was the second striker that played off Fernando Adi in Portland. That's that should have been the game plan. You look at his time in Portland, and he was the guy that would get onto the loose balls and could play that secondary role. In Dallas, he's
unbelievable work rate, unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely, and the nicest guy too.
Yeah, great. I loved having Maxi in the team. I thought he was a great player to have in the squad, both his work rate and his leadership by example, and a good squad member in terms of positivity. Unbelievable work rate, relentless work rate, never give up attitude. All those things are terrific. It's just, after a while, his time had run its course in Dallas, and these things happen. You get a good run with Oscar, and when Oscar left, it was, obviously going to be Maxi's time to leave too. So, no bad feelings looking back on him at all. I just wish I could have seen him in that 2-striker system. It would have been fun, but it just wasn't to be because there was no 9 worth a damn at the time around here. All right, in the midst of this 2018, midst of these players departing and this sort of reload, or as we said, waiting around maybe for the next cycle to start, it's actually a pretty decent season. FC Dallas starts 10-2-5, which is remarkably good through Independence Day. And while the second half wasn't quite as good, it doesn't have a complete collapse or anything. But there is a negative 3-game losing streak at the end of the season. But they still finish 16-9-9, which is good enough for 4th place in the West. So overall, a positive season, if maybe it pales in comparison to 2016. So like in that context, we think it's a lame season. But if you compare it to 2017 or compare it to 2003 or whatever, it's a great season.
Yeah, it's, the finish defined it.
Sour taste, yeah.
Yeah, having that, they limped into the playoffs, and this is a team that were second in the West for a long time. So that final day loss to Colorado effectively took them from having a first round bye to, you know, to then missing out on playing Real Salt Lake at home to instead get a significantly harder challenge in Portland.
Yeah.
And Portland comes in and does the business. I don't think anyone was shocked by it.
Diego Valeri does what Diego Valeri does and scores a brace. And as you say, the season turns south, and then they get the tougher matchup, and it was just the writing was on the wall, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. And it's kind of funny. We talked about how Mauro Diaz and how he'll stack up in FC Dallas history, but I mean, to me, the measuring stick is his compatriot Diego Valeri. You want that kind of longevity and impact on and off the field.
Yep.
He's been a thorn in every club side, not just Dallas's. It seems like every time Portland come to town, MLS wants me to speak to Valeri and write something on him.
Yeah.
I'm
who
always
I
happy
want
to.
Paxton Pomykal to be. Diego Valeri.
Yes.
Yep. By the way, in this playoff loss, shout out to Matt Hedges for the never give up, never surrender 94th minute goal. All right, the big shocker lands in the postseason when Oscar Pareja mutually terminates his contract with FC Dallas so he can take the job at Club Tijuana. Again, we've talked about this idea of cycles and club coaches, the rise, the peak, and the fall. Oscar and I had been talking for 5 months as the 2018 was winding down about the idea of this cycle and whether he wanted to ride one again, whether he wanted to try something fresh, whether he wanted to challenge himself in Mexico, at Cholos for specifically in this case. Still, nonetheless, I was actually, he and I were having these discussions, and it was all triggered by the false story about him interviewing for the national team, which when it was reported was not true. He eventually did interview, but it was not till after that. But nonetheless, I think even I, who had actually been talking to him about this concept, was shocked when it actually happened, and he headed off to Cholos. So let's put a bow on Oscar Pareja's time in Dallas. Dan, for you, where do you put Oscar, and what are your thoughts on Oscar in the grinder context?
I mean, a legend in every sense, right? He erased a lot of the bad memories of Chelos's tenure. Obviously from establishing the academy in the first place, really brought it through to a place where we are now seeing the benefit of the Paxton Pomykals and the Jesus Ferreiras. I think his playoff run a bit ropey, but now that they're in that one-legged playoff, I would love to have seen how he'd have got on with that.
Yeah.
And we know he had to deal with greater confines than most clubs, particularly most clubs that were challenging as consistently as FC Dallas was.
Yeah, he and I specifically lamented and talked about many times the lack of a real goal-scoring nine, that he never got somebody to fill that role when he was here.
And I remember talking to him and Fernando Clavijo so much, and they were saying, everything was always waiting on a guy's contract. It was, this guy's contract's going to expire. This guy is going to be at a place where his club will sell him. And everything was always like 6 months down the line or a year down the line. And we're in a sport where things can change in an instant. So it was always rough that was the position that they were put in, to kind of have to chase the dream as such. Which, I mean, we're still kind of seeing. That's what Franco Jara is.
Yeah, 2 years later, right? Instead of buying him at the time.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Well, 2019 is the craziest offseason heading into 2019, I think, in club history. And it may not seem like it in hindsight, but I'll lay out why it's crazy in hindsight. To me, it's baffling. Before Luchi is hired, FC Dallas starts making moves. Right? Now, you would assume that the club's technical director is doing these things. But Fernando Calvillo, you remember, had taken a leave of absence back in September of 2018. And so basically Luis Muzzi, who was his assistant, is taking over. But on December 18th, Muzzi's announced as Orlando City's new technical director. So at which point did he know he was leaving? And there were still rumors and reports to this day that he was effectively doing both teams' jobs at the same time in the latter parts of 2018. So basically, you come out of 2018 and there's a committee essentially made up of Muzzi, Dan Hunt, Luchi Gonzalez as the academy director at the time, technically, Marco Ferruzzi basically as the first team coaching staff representative, Chris Hayden's involved in this discussion, who's the VP of Youth and the Academy Director. So those guys are all basically making decisions on the roster for 2019, all before Luchi is actually eventually hired on December 12th, I think it is, that he is eventually hired. So that's a weird setup and a weird situation for this season, as the club is making some big, huge personnel decisions, right? Maynard Figueroa's contract's not picked up. Roland Lamont's contract's not picked up. Tesho Akindele is traded to Orlando. So did Muzzi trade Tesho to himself in Orlando? You have to wonder. Maxi Urruti is traded to Montreal. Victor Ulloa is traded to FC Cincinnati. And all of that happens before Luchi's announced on December 16th. Here's where I wrote it down, December 16th. So what is going on? I mean, who's in charge and who's making all these decisions?
Well, it was weird because I mean we'd both spoken to him and heard about this plan that Fernando and Oscar had put together with Musi.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, Oscar's at this point in Tijuana. Fernando was, you know, unfortunately winding down. And Musi is shopping the next gig, and it's, you know, and little do we know, we're going for this plan on Oscar Pareja's 4-2-3-1 counterattack, but we're going to transition to Luchi Gonzalez style, which, you know, it's not hugely different, but it's got some significant changes. And you know, there was even another wrinkle. I'm pretty sure I'm going to jump the gun here, but you're going to talk about Zdeno Kondrasek, Cobra.
Yeah.
Arriving.
Arrivals are next, yeah.
And I asked Marco Ferruzzi about him. I was like, hey, where did you guys see him? Because, you know, a 30-year-old Czech player playing in the Polish league is not something you typically think, yes, we will look for that. And he was like, oh, MLS told us about him. They want to get more Eastern European guys. That's why Portland just signed a goalkeeper from some Eastern European country, like Latvia or somewhere like that. And so I'm like, now, he also mentioned that he did go over there to meet Andrasik, so I assume he's scouted him in person, but it's just kind of, it's bizarre, right? Your scouting network is seemingly starting with the league itself. It seems very 1996.
Well, MLS, a lot of people don't know that MLS has this sort of behind-the-scenes initiative to suggest and offer players to their teams in the last year or two, I'm not exactly sure, from countries that are less often mined by MLS. And Cobra is one of these guys. And there definitely is this, it's not just FC Dallas that's done this, and it's not just with FC Dallas that they've offered these players. It's a real thing. And as you mentioned, within days of the Luchi announcement, and who knows when he's actually making decisions. They announced it on December 16th, but who knows when they, I mean, for all we know, as soon as the day Oscar resigns, they actually make Luchi the de facto guy, despite the fact they're talking about interviews and Todd Ramos is involved or not, and who knows what's going on. But nonetheless, within days of Luchi's announcement, they announced Cobra coming in, they announced Brisson coming in. Again, an interesting one because the eventual technical director, Andres Zanata, comes here, is the one who sells them Brisson from Gremio. and then Brian Acosta is announced in January. Again, a player that Oscar and Clavillo had been trying to get for like 2 years. All of which happens before after Muzi has left, but before the new 2D announced, Andres Zanata is announced on January 30th. So again, it's hard to really know who's in charge of all this stuff, other than, I guess, obviously Luchi and Marco for Ruzzi, basically.
Yeah, it's kind of like I remember like us and Peter were kind of like, is this a weird cowboy situation? Are the owners
Yeah,
making
Dan Hunt might be
like
doing it.
sporting decisions? Because that's a frightening prospect. I
It
mean,
is.
yeah, we know Clark. Clark was quite the player in his day, captain in SMU, but still, um, to have the Hunt brothers making that significant a decision and not, people who get paid to make soccer decisions is kind of a weird prospect.
Yeah, let's talk about Cobra too, because honestly, this is one of the
Oh
most
boy.
bizarre seasons from an individual player I've ever seen. Because within the first session that I go and watch where he's training, within 5 minutes, I'm thinking to myself, "Oh crap, this dude is terrible." But I swore to myself, like I said, I'm gonna give him a chance. I'm gonna watch him for a couple of weeks. And I went and watched him, and I watched him train, and I watched him scrimmage, and he was terrible. And we watched the whole season, and for 7 months, the guy is a complete worthless bust. And I'm talking about the minutes he's getting. I'm talking about training. He has nothing to offer this team. And now I will give him 100% full credit because he never quit, and Luchi never quit on him, and I certainly had. And Luchi kept working with him, and Luchi kept giving him instructions and said, "Here's what you're not doing. You got to do this and this and this. If you do these three things, then I will let you play." And Cobra has even himself said, "I was terrible." And I finally listened to the coach, and I finally did what he asked, and then bam, 8 goals in 10 games. He becomes one of the most charismatic stars in the shortest span I have ever seen a guy have in a single season. It is unbelievable.
It was so weird. I mean, obviously we both personally got a lot of like
Shtick.
back from fans who, because we were reporting what we saw.
He
This
was
guy is,
garbage.
yeah, he's technically terrible,
Yeah.
yada yada yada. Coaches are telling us he's a bust and they don't really know how this came to be. And yeah, like you say,
They tried
he
to sell
puts
him.
in, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, to the one of the Norwegian clubs, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But they tried to loan him out as well, I think. Didn't they?
Yeah.
But obviously he puts the work in. He listens to the coaches. He gets his heads down. He makes his minutes count. Everything looks good. I mean, I still want to see him do it consistently in away games. He's
Yeah.
still
On the
only
road. Yeah.
scored in
Yeah.
one away game.
Well, the fact they've gone
Um,
after another striker tells you how much confidence there is, but nonetheless, the guy's been
I mean,
doing the
that's
business.
Harris still the one that got away for Dan Hunt. So I
Yeah.
mean, either way, that's a great opportunity that presents itself. But yeah, I mean, it's so funny because like we're it's kind of the weird thing that people don't really get to see is that we might hammer someone for like playing badly or training badly. That doesn't mean it's like a personal thing. We talk to these guys, and
Yeah.
Cobra is one of the nicest guys. He was one of the few that had a weird thing about, and I still do as someone who's not American, locker room access. He's pretty stern on that one, but nice, such a nice guy.
Yeah.
You want him to succeed, and it's like it's almost painful when you don't see him succeed sometimes.
Yeah, the character that you see on the Instagram or on the little video clips, that's him around the clock. He really is just like that. He's so much fun to be around. He's such a character, and I'm glad that he's performing at a high level, and I'm glad he's back into his national team, and I hope that Franco Har doesn't crush all that stuff. I'd like to see both of them producing and playing well. So, I wish him the best. But honestly, one of the craziest seasons in 2019 that I've ever seen from a single player in terms of being as so completely utterly worthless. It was almost like a new midseason signing. Really was.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way it changed. All right, so 2019 is a good draft year as well. We get Johnny Nelson, who might end up being one of the steals of that draft if it weren't for Ryan Hogshead having one of the greatest seasons we've ever seen. We'll come back to that. And Colin Montgomery, who I have super, super high hopes for. It's also a good homegrown haul with Edwin Cerrillo, Dante Seeley, and Ricardo Pepe, who first signs with North Texas, but eventually joins FC Dallas as a homegrown. This is back to the FC Dallas ways of doing business. And really, 2019, Dan, we have to call this, I think, the year of the homegrown, don't we? I mean, Jesus Ferreira leads the club with 8 goals and 6 assists. Paxton Pomykal has a breakout season and probably would have been FC Dallas MVP if he would have managed to be a little healthier over the back half of the year. Once some changes happen in the roster, which we'll come down to later why this happens, but Brandon Cervania becomes a starter and has an amazing second half of the season. Edwin Cerrillo had a great start of the season and then had his season derailed by some bad performances with the U20s. We see Brian Reynolds break through with some playing time. We see Thomas Roberts get like 7 starts. Reggie is still Reggie. So really, 2019, season of the homegrown.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Edwin Cerrillo was nailed on Rookie of the Year up until that Under-20 World Cup.
Yeah.
And then to have Cervania, another homegrown, just swoop in and take over, it's, I mean, it's fantastic. And, I've missed this so much. Thomas Roberts.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The year of the homegrown is perfect. Because, we talked about 2018 more so as it, but 2019 continued. You've got older guys, you've got the you've got the Cobras, and to some degree Brian Acosta, who you bring in as an experienced player, and then they've got homegrowns outshining them.
Yeah. Yeah, what is it? My good friend Mike Renshaw always says, and I think he's probably stolen this quote from many people, but if they're good enough, they're old enough. Is the famous one said by the Dutch coach. And the follow-up that Renshaw always said to me was, soccer's a young man's game. Soccer is made for people to 18, 19, 20 years to be the stars. And I think it's true, and this club is showing that it's true. And if you're trying to make a sustainable long-term club on a budget, and let's be clear, this is the Hunt, so it's a budget. If you're trying to make a sustainable winning team, this is how you do it, is with young homegrowns and the best academy in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. Except for when you played New York Red Bulls in a weird
we'll get back
3-1
to
loss.
All right, that brings me to the most shocking. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, and the good thing with having those younger players, they've all grown up with Luchi. We're gonna obviously talk about Luchi Ball and the adaptation, and that, as younger players who aren't so set in their ways, they have a much easier path to adapt to that.
That brings me, Dan, to the most shocking mid-season signing I've ever seen. Shocking in a bad way. And that is our good friend, Edwin Gyasi. Now, on paper, this seems like it might be a legitimate signing. But I'm going to be polite and just say that it didn't work out so much. He has a couple of walkabout sub-performances. And then he gets this all-important first start down in Orlando when the team really needs him to step up. And as near as we can tell, and this is hard to prove, but as near as we can tell, he basically quits after 20 minutes of the insane Orlando Heat, I will grant you, and then proceeds to fake an injury to get out of the game. Now, can we prove that's what happened? No. But I think I will challenge anyone that thinks that isn't what happened to watch the tape and tell me what you see happen. That's what I see happen. I've never seen anything like this. He makes one token sub appearance and then never plays again. And I guarantee you that if you got a coach to talk about it, the coaches would tell you that dude quit and faked an injury to get out of the game. Because 2 days later, he's back in training and looks great in training again.
Yeah, it was weird. I remember us talking to Luchi after training, and Luchi doesn't, if he doesn't want to talk about something, and the Orlando plan is the perfect example. He kind of steps around things and talks about challenges and accepting them and embracing them, in a roundabout way. When it came to Gyasi, it was just, yeah, never seen that before. He's magically better today, though.
Yeah, he looks fine now.
And then it was kind of funny because he's then trying to create this narrative. There's some Ghanaian publications, and he's trying to create this narrative that he wasn't getting the chances from Dallas, and that he chose to to go back to CSK Sofia. It's like, no,
No, no.
he quit
Yeah,
and he didn't, and then he was kind of kicked out of training after that.
yeah. Maybe he underestimated how hot it is here. It's entirely possible.
That humidity in Orlando is no joke.
It is no joke. I will grant
I
you that.
I
But
don't
to
envy
quit
those
on the
players
team,
playing on it.
you can't quit on a team though. Surely can't fake an injury. That's even worse. All right. So the other crazy piece of personal insanity we have to talk about is a guy that we haven't talked about much yet because honestly he has never had any impact. But nonetheless, Pablo Aranguiz, who had been seen as the Mauro Diaz's replacement, but had never done anything. That's why we haven't talked about him until now. He basically says, I want to go home. And FC Dallas arranges a loan for him back to Union Española, and now he's done a second loan to Ude Chile. But this is another player that seems like it might have quality when he came in, but never works out, never has any impact. And again, in a different way, effectively quits on the team. And for me, I'm quite confident this is a player that you'll never see him come back because when you quit on a team, a coach does not want you back. Even if it's a different kind of quit, but it's still a quit, is it not?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It was a weird situation. When he came in, they wanted to try and bring him in gradually and not try and overstress his body. But then he's not taking instruction in training. He's moody. He's sulky. He wants to be the star because he's been the big fish in this tiny, tiny puddle. And then he's not getting the games. He sulks even more. He gets a start in a friendly and gets sent off after 10 minutes. Or he gets told he's going to get sent off after 10 minutes and then takes a guy out a couple of minutes later and does get sent off.
Well, the one thing I'll say in his defense is the Luchi system doesn't use a pure 10, so he is out of sorts for the system, but nonetheless, it's not,
I mean, if you're paid to do a job, you adapt to do it, right?
Right.
I mean,
right.
we've all had to adapt in some way with the whole coronavirus with our jobs. I mean, us on Zoom calls with FC Dallas staff every day, for example.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there were a lot of rumors about having kids in Chile that he wanted to be closer to, and then
Fair enough.
The Chilean media saying, everyone wants him, but no one can afford him. So hence the loans, which will run until his contract runs out, and it'll be another Anibal Shala.
Yeah, the one thing I will say in the bigger context is I remember when Chile used to be a much better league than MLS, and now it's most definitely not, I think. Anyway, that's a side note. The Open Cup is poor again in 2019 after beating Oklahoma City. Dallas loses to USL side New Mexico United, which has got a nice little fan base going there. They're doing good things, but nonetheless, you should beat them. The only positive out of this game is we get to see Ricardo Pepi play with FC Dallas, which is exciting and is a precursor to his being a homegrown signing.
Yeah.
The other 2019 shout out we need to give out is to Ryan Hollingshead, who, as we mentioned, Johnny Nelson is on his way to being a steal pick of the draft and looks fantastic with a bright future. But Ryan Hollingshead has what I think is unquestionably the best left back season in club history. And we've had some good left backs around here. But this season is 6 goals and 3 assists out of the back spot. And that only sort of tells you a little bit about how good his season was.
Yeah, I mean, he'd filled in at left back before. Obviously the 2016 season, but he was never a good left back. He was a good utility player. A utility player is a really offensive term. I'm not going to say that. A good player who can play in many positions with many tools, who made it kind of work. What we saw in 2019 is Ryan Hollins had become a good left back. He got the defensive side of it. He balanced it well with the attacking side, which was, as a natural winger was his wheelhouse anyway. But it was good to see him get those defensive tendencies, not leave the defense exposed, not leave the defensive midfielders dragged over, and it definitely helped to balance things out, especially as Dallas kind of went into that 4-3-3 Luchi ball with a hopefully single pivot.
Yeah. Speaking of single pivots, the final player move of the year comes when Carlos Grezzo jumps to FC Augsburg, which is a German club. Now, honestly, this one's not a surprise. I had actually predicting since the middle of 2018 that the Grezzo would be leaving over the winter, or in this next summer window, which is when it happens. So, one of the best signings in terms of pure value to the team that FC Dallas has ever made, and I'm pretty sure they made some money on this by the time they finally moved him. But a great underheralded player that had a terrific run here in Dallas, and I have no complaints about him, both coming in and his departure. He was class the whole time and a great player the whole time.
Yeah, great locker room presence, very classy player. Not an ego.
Yeah, I mean, Oscar and Luchi both, talk about sort of these leadership pieces, and Grezzo was the essentially Spanish Hispanic captain of the team in many ways, despite the fact he was so young.
Yeah, I mean, at the start of the 2019 season, Matt Hedges has obviously been a long-term captain. Reto puts the armband Luchi puts the armband on Reto, and Arsenal was like, so what's happening? I was like, a co-captain situation. He said, actually, I've got 3 captains, and the third is Grezzo.
Yeah. So getting into the season a little bit, Luchi's team is quite young, and they're doing the conversion to Luchi ball. So it's a little bit up and down. When you have a young team this young, it's very up and down. So you're seeing a lot of big wins and a lot of big losses. The one that really sticks in the craw is the one you brought up earlier, which is the 3-1 home loss to New York when the Red Bulls played they literally played a 100% reserve lineup, about half of which was made up of guys from Red Bulls too.
I mean, it was like that game in Seattle when Dallas a few years ago. Dallas had beat San Jose on the road. They had Seattle in midweek, and then they had Chicago at the weekend. And Oscar made 7 changes, and Brad Friedel or Casey Keller,
disrespectful or whatever.
So disrespectful,
yeah.
And they got blown out 5-0. They were supposed to. It was a throwaway game.
Yeah.
This is what you expect, and you're like, oh wow, yeah, that's going to be a really easy win. They lose 3-1.
Yeah. That was one of the darkest moments in Luchi's, and this was early enough in the season that we were really questioning what was going on.
The darkest moment was the Chicago away game I was at, and I mentioned it to Luchi, and he apologized to me profusely.
To you personally?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dan. Well, on the opposite upside of those losses, there are wins like 4-2 at RSL, 5-3 over Minnesota, 5-1 over Houston, and 6-0 over Sporting Kansas City to finish the season and squeak into the playoffs. So this is what we mean about big wins and big losses, and they end up. You can hit on any of those games if you want to specifically, but they end up finishing 13, 12, and 9, which is 7th in the West, which, as you and I and Peter on this podcast predicted would be what would happen, the bottom of the playoffs in the West. They have 54 goals for, which is the second most in club history. 54 goals for, that's incredible. But they also have a really high 46 goals against. Again, lots of big wins and lots of big losses. Young team, up and down, new system, new coach, young coach, all symptoms of the team being exactly what it is, a bunch of babies learning how to play professionally and compete at a high level.
Definitely. And you only have to look at Luchi's influences as well. Guys like Jurgen Klopp, guys that are more likely to win a 5-4 than a 1-0. It was exactly what you should have expected to see. FC Dallas giving up goals and scoring goals in abundance.
Yeah, I feel like this trend is going to continue. When you play Luchi ball and when you have a lot of possession, and when you have trying to play a single pivot, there are going to be often games where you're going to score a lot of goals, but you might also have games where you get blown out, and it does happen, and it did happen last year quite a bit. So in the playoffs, FC Dallas draws the Sounders again in the knockout, and despite the fact that Dallas loses this game, this is a really, really enjoyable, remarkable game. I know it sounds funny to say that you enjoyed a loss and that it was a fantastic game and a loss, but it really was, I felt. I mean, FC Dallas, 40 minutes in is dead and buried. The game's over. They're out of it. But yet, miraculously, they're not. And they fight their way back in, and despite the fact that Jordan Morris has a hat trick, they still manage to claw back. And it really was a team that they pushed the Seattle team, who was a much better team. They pushed them to the limit and show, I think, some of the potential FC Dallas has going forward.
Yeah, I mean, 2-0 down in Seattle, that's a really familiar story, and it never has a happy ending. To take them to extra time and to have the goals kind of spread about across the pitch. Reggie had one, I think Matt Hedges had one. Brian Acosta would have had one if Santiago Mosquera passed him an open space, but he's an idiot.
Yeah, pass the damn ball.
Yeah, that was so painful.
Yeah.
You know, it was a genuinely thrilling game, and it's. I mean, I think it was a better overall game than the home win over Seattle a few years ago that everyone clamors over.
Yeah.
You know, a great game's a great game whether you win it or lose it.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
that was a great game, and against, yeah, again the eventual champions.
Yeah. And Dallas's current bogey team, playoff bogey team, Seattle Sounders.
The bogey team's whoever wins MLS Cup. It's always whoever
Yeah,
wins.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, Dallas has always got so many. There's so many stories about Dallas in the playoffs and getting tripped up, and so many what ifs, and so many. It's that's eventually you got to power through one of those. That's one of Lucci's big hallmarks, right? Let's change the history of this club. Let's power through these hiccups and get it done.
Yeah, and even things like, he doesn't have. He's kind of a realist. Like this year he's talking about we want a home playoff game.
Well, he knows about the cycle as
And
much
that's
as
the
anybody.
next.
He knows he's building towards a year or two further down the road than this.
Oh, absolutely. It's great to temper reasonable expectations to not just go, when Dan Hunt talks about, I want to win MLS Cup with a homegrown 11, you're like, okay, let's maybe get to another MLS Cup with any team first. And then,
Yeah. Yeah, baby steps.
and Luchi is definitely a realist in that. And I mean, I know fans appreciate it. I know media appreciate it. So I hope the players appreciate it.
Yeah, I hope they do too. Well, Dan, that wraps up our 2015 through 2019 history jaunt. I don't think there's any reason to go into the 2020. That's the current season that we talk about when they're playing. We've talked about the death already this year on this podcast. This podcast is 2015 to 2019. We've reached that point. So, Dan, thank you for coming on and rapping about the old days with me.
Thanks. I really look forward to when we get to do these about the Orlando thing, or times where we just get to whisper Thomas Roberts over and over again just for fun.
Well, let's hope for the future, and hopefully we're a month away from doing regular podcasts about maybe this Orlando bubble if they pull it off, or whatever it is they eventually get going. If you've enjoyed this podcast or any of our other coverage that we do on the blog or on Twitter or on Facebook, on YouTube, please consider supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/thirddegree. We don't break any news there, but I provide a little more in-depth insider, little chats, little discussions for everybody. Hopefully you'll find it worthwhile to subscribe and support us, and hopefully you find it what we do ordinarily worthwhile and worth your support. So thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for supporting the club. Thanks again, Dan. This has been Third Degree, the podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will talk again soon.